Hi, I'm Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM Show podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. We are going to dive into a topic that is back again in the upper Midwest, and that is HPAI. We're going to be talking about diseases in animals. We'll talk a lot about that today. Our guest is the Secretary of Agriculture in the state of Iowa, Mike Naig, where he kind of gives us not necessarily numbers, but what's happened, what's different between the outbreaks of 22-23 and 2015. We'll focus heavily on poultry. We'll also talk about African swine fever just a little bit and just the general sense of how fighting diseases has changed, what has been learned as each one of these outbreaks happens. We'll also talk about those backyard flocks and larger confined operations and what they mean in this story. That is today's MTOM Show podcast. Your years of being Ag Secretary have been filled with a number of things, but it seems to be you're always out front talking about HPAI. Why is that? How did it fall to you as to be the person that we go to for information and kind of speaking for the state?
You bet. Well, when you look at the response to a foreign animal disease, and so it's important to start at the beginning. What is a foreign animal disease? Because in livestock production, we're dealing with disease management and herd health all the time. What's different about an FAD? Well, those are a list of diseases that, there's global treaties around that countries agree that if they have. And those would be High Pathogenic Avian Influenza, African swine fever, foot and mouth disease are the three that we really think about. But if you have that in your country, then you report to this global, consortium, and you say, and the idea is that you're trying to prevent the movement of that disease from country to country. So immediately what happens is trade shuts down. So if we had African swine fever, immediately every export market for pork stops. Mm-hmm. And then you have to work yourself out of that. And so countries then have protocols that they put together, plans, programs, regulations, laws, they pay indemnity. All of that, it leads to you trying to say, we're going to prevent a foreign animal disease, but if we get one, that we can then manage it in a way that we can prove that we're free of it at some point, and you can start trading again. So the way that works in the U.S. is that's a joint response between states have the primary lead response in most cases, and then they work together with the USDA. And then, of course, the industry is the third leg to that stool. So in Iowa, whether it's by code in Iowa law, the Iowa Department of Ag is the lead entity on that, but also in our relationship with USDA. So, but that's pretty logical, right? I mean, we're state veterinarian works for me, state veterinarians in our office. It's logical. We've got the expertise to respond. I keep saying this is something I really wish we weren't good at or we didn't know anything about, meaning I really wish we didn't have to deal with it, but we do.
I'm not saying I get all my political pop culture references from West Wing, but there weren't political shows that used to talk about, when they talk about the president or whatever, only West Wing would be the ones that we have mad cows somewhere.
Right.
So you learned, but I mean, you're filtering information through because as your boots on the ground.
That's right. So it's our responsibility both to respond, but also we take very seriously the responsibility of then communicating about what's happening. There's no food safety issue related to high path because, of course, animals that are infected don't make it into the supply chain. That's important for consumers to know that. But it's also important from an economic impact standpoint that we also try to minimize the economic fallout from a foreign animal disease. Again, we're talking high path today, but apply that to foot and mouth disease or African swine fever. If you have it and you have it in a serious way, I mean, it can impact the price of corn, the price of soybean, everything, right? We all know that this is all connected. And so those are the reasons that we take it so seriously.
And you have certain, I guess, checklists?
We do.
And do you refine those from year to year or
absolutely.
Outbreak to outbreak?
So the famous kind of outbreaks that people look at would be in the UK, foot and mouth disease outbreak, right, early this century. And devastating impact. A lot of folks, USDA sent a lot of veterinarians over to work in that response. And people brought home a lot of learnings from that. 2015 had been the previous, the biggest foreign animal disease outbreak in U.S. history was in 2015. We've now surpassed that in this last 2 years, unfortunately. But 2015 taught us a lot, and really Iowa's effort to improve and to raise the bar and have more capacity to respond as the state of Iowa really is born out of 2015. Then Secretary Northey was Secretary of Ag at the time. I was the Deputy Secretary. We learned major lessons. The industry learned, USDA learned about how to mount a more effective response. And so, yes, we've got plans. All foreign animal disease outbreaks are sort of the same in that same subject matter. You've still got kind of the same procedures, but each disease is different and each industry is different. And so then you have to have kind of specific plans within those. And we exercise those plans. And I like to tell our team, if we don't break our plan, we're not testing it hard enough. And so what you want to do is put it through live, multi-day, maybe multi-state exercises, and you really try to break it and then fix it, learn what were the gaps, what did we realize that we hadn't thought of. And there's always something that you go, my goodness, how did we not think of that? But that's the process that we're going through.
So that's the process of communicating what happened, responding to what happened. But what's been happening? You say we've surpassed previous numbers. Does that mean that we've not been as successful in responding with preventing the deaths of animals?
So we got to look at this a couple ways. So 2015, the last time that we had a massive outbreak in high path in the country, really it lasted during the spring of the year. So high path is being carried by migratory birds. When they fly north, they're bringing it through our area. When they fly south now, and we've learned in the fall, they can also carry it. But in 15, we only had an outbreak in the spring. And by fall, the wild birds had developed immunity to it, and they weren't spreading the virus anymore. And so that was a half a year kind of experience for us. But now this last outbreak, it goes back to the spring of 22. We had an outbreak in the spring of 22, the fall of 22, the spring of 23, and the fall of 23. And so now we're 2 years. So yes, it surpassed the numbers in 2015, but I would argue, we're on year 2 of this outbreak. As to the question of how are we doing in the response, in Iowa, the numbers are dramatically different. We're talking about, again, 51 sites over 2 years. That year we had 77 sites in a few months. We also saw back in 2015 a lot of movement of the virus from site to site, lateral movement. And that was telling us that biosecurity was an issue. It was either moving on equipment or people. Something was happening. It was tracking between farms. That hasn't happened this time around. And that tells me that those lessons were learned very well. We're still struggling, I think, broadly with how do you prevent wild bird interactions? How do you keep birds from getting into buildings? Those are biosecurity questions that have yet to be answered. But also I would note in this outbreak, we've had fewer large commercial sites and more backyard small flocks. And so our numbers just aren't anywhere close to being the same in terms of total population impacted.
I go back to 20 years ago, you still couldn't enter a hog facility without shower in, shower out. The hog industry has figured some of that out. But they've had outbreaks of other things caused whatever. But did the poultry industry not have those same standards? But I always felt that they did when you're talking about that building to building. Is that what you mean? Or are we talking the rodents that are going from one to the other?
It could be that too. There's all kinds of vectors for virus. But in terms of the biosecurity building to building, it's very much that, people movements. You've got 2 distinct kind of industries in the state of Iowa that are being impacted by high path. We're number 1 in egg production. We have very large egg producers, very well-designed, modern facilities that absolutely are every bit the shower in, shower out, high biosecurity focus in that egg industry. And then we have a turkey industry that is a little more like having finishers, hog finishers that across the state in multiple sites, and those are a little more exposed to the elements. You're not going to see a shower in, shower out facility on a finisher site, and so they are different. We have to keep that in mind, but. What I know about biosecurity is it's challenging because you've got to do it every single day. It's costly. You got to train for it, and you got to do it right every single time. And there are things that can happen. So I think there's more to be learned about that. But I'm proud of the fact that the lateral movement has been curtailed, and our response is better. As in, we detect it faster, we respond quicker, and those sites we have disposal and cleanup in process faster, and sites are getting back into business faster. And so those are things that I'm trying to measure and say, are we being successful or not?
Do you get the sense that those people that you've been trying to help get back into business or to get their barns repopulated quicker are more understanding because they have been through it before? Or is it they just know that's going to be the cost of doing business?
No, I mean, every single person that goes through this, believe me, is learning something. This is not something you want to experience. Also, it's important that, you may be a turkey producer that has never had an infected premise. That doesn't mean that you're not being affected by this. That doesn't mean that you're not stressed. It might be this is your morning to go out and find that you've got a building affected. And so that industry in particular, the poultry world in Iowa has done a good job of sharing that experience across. And of course, we've had lots of grower meetings and bring folks together to share the experience. Here's what you can expect. Here's what happens. Here are the challenges that you're going to have. So no, I think that everybody that goes through it learns something. And honestly, we improve our response every single time that we have to deploy. So that's just part of the process. The fact is, this variant of high path that we're dealing with now and over the last 2 years is just something that's highly infective and apparently infective at very small quantities. And so, you can't let your mind wander of how are the various ways that this is making its way in. But, when birds are migrating, when they're flooding the area with virus, there are ways that it finds its way in.
There might be somebody who's not familiar with how that happens. When you say flooding an area or the wild, those birds are flying over. They're dropping.
Yeah.
They're sharing water. How's that getting from? I mean, we've shored up these facilities. We have roofs. It's not like we're talking about a wide open facility here.
There are lots of questions about that, to be honest. Look, something that I think has been instructive for people to sort of get their heads around is, well, we all went through COVID the last, several years, and you think, well, how did that move around, right? And it's not unlike that, right? But it can be tracked in on boots. Small birds can get into buildings. It comes in through ventilation fans. There's a number of ways that it can move, and that's where we got to go to the next level here. I'm not of the mind that some people say, well, this is just something we can never solve. I don't believe that.
You're not in that camp?
No, I don't believe that. I can't allow myself to be in that situation because I think there's always more that we can do. And really what I know, and I think what's borne out here over the last couple of years is, look, this has to do with trying to minimize the contact between wild birds and anything that can track in or cause that virus to make it into a building. So more to be done. There are some interesting, I think, engineering questions around, well, so are there deficiencies in a design or in a building that may need to be shored up, and those are things that need to be researched as well.
Do you find the industry, it doesn't have to necessarily be poultry, that's just the topic, but I mean the hog industry, have they been engaged in these discussions of how do we improve from things we can't control? I can control you and me from going into that building. I can't control that rodent, that bird, that whatever getting in the ventilation vent and causing a problem.
That's what we need people to be thinking about. I think it has been instructive across species, right? I mean, maybe the most analogous would be poultry or turkey to swine because of just the concept of a finisher building and that sort of thing. Species are different. There's no doubt about it. But every producer needs to be thinking about, and by the way, you're not just trying to keep a foreign animal disease out of your site, any disease, right? Typically what you would say is the things that you do to improve your biosecurity are things that are helping your herd health and your productivity and your profitability. So in the long run, those things pay. But there are things, we are so thankful that we have not had to deal with this with African swine fever, but we are watching it around the world, and it is a threat, and we need to be thinking that way.
Well, you've been around long enough to know that the World Pork Expo canceled because we're not wanting this virus to go here, even though it probably wouldn't, but it's what's the political term? Abundance of
Absolutely.
caution, the COVID term that we heard so much.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the world
real.
we live in, right?
It's real. And we live in you know this as well as anybody. Agriculture is global, right? People move around the world. Products move around the world. Here's the good news. And again, I'm not a fatalist when it comes to this either. We have kept things out of this country very successfully. I believe that we can keep African swine fever out of this country. I don't believe that it's just a matter of when, not if. Now, what is it? You got to make sure that you're working to ensure that you can say that. It's beagle brigades sniffing out products coming in at airports. It's helping country. Dominican Republic has this now. Haiti, very difficult places to work, but the United States government should be doing what we can to try to help contain that virus where it is. If you can knock it down there, the chance of spreading is reduced. And so those are the things you got to be proactive. You've got to be aggressive in this.
Where are we at in that discussion where it comes to the large concentration of these animals? And is there ever, maybe we ought to look at confinements differently?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there are many positives for the way that we do what we do in terms of efficiency and cost, and consumers ultimately benefit from that. Those are maybe for other folks to talk about. I try to look at the realities of our agriculture as it exists today. I do think that people should be thinking about how would you things that made sense decades ago maybe don't today, and so maybe you wouldn't design a site exactly as maybe you wouldn't put the feed mill smack dab in the middle of a site, because those are some things that you could think about. But there are many positives for the way that we do animal agriculture, and so I don't know that means that we shouldn't do it the way we do because of this. But those are things you have to take into account. How you move people around a site. I know there's a lot more thinking about, do we know where, if we have a vaccination crew or a crew that's coming onto our farm, do we know where they've been? Are they a contract crew? Did they just show up from somebody else? Those are the types of things that I think be wise about those things. And I've seen improvements in that area.
The site is going to stay, but how that site operates is what's evolving and changing.
Very much so. And how product moves on the site itself, those are things that I do think that warrant investigating.
Because there's always going to be those that are going to probably write you letters or stop you in a parade or whatever and just, I'd like to see that confinement agriculture go away. And this might be their entry into saying this is why.
Yeah. Well, and that argument has certainly been out there. Again, I would go back to, we can't look at these things entirely in isolation, right? This is one component of this. I've got 3 children. We go through eggs like you wouldn't believe at my house. We're looking for lots of protein.
I've seen the size
muscle,
of a couple of them. Yes, I know how they.
We're
need
going
their
for
protein.
muscle development here, so we want protein. The reality is, consumers benefit greatly because of the efficient, safe, affordable food system that we have. And by the way, there's room for a lot of diversification in that too. So that's the great part of the American food system, is you can get what you want.
Well, let's look at it this way. From 2015 to 2022, 2023, has the poultry industry changed the way they operate the barns, the sites themselves? Much like a farmer hedges and sells some grain in October, some grain in December. You know what? We're going to put some egg layers in Arkansas. We're going to put some egg layers in Illinois. We're going to spread out our risk in other places. Have you seen that happen?
I can only speak to what we're seeing in the state of Iowa, and really we haven't seen in terms of distribution or massive changes in that, right? I mean, we still have a high concentration of poultry in, we got kind of northwest Iowa and southeast Iowa when it comes to turkey production. Egg production is, a lot in central and northwestern Iowa. We haven't seen much of a change in the state itself.
So we're not seeing that's not something you're seeing. Interesting.
Not in Iowa.
Right. But I mean, I think wouldn't you hear like,
I would
if a barn doesn't repopulate with what it was in before?
We've not seen that.
Okay.
People have brought facilities back into production.
Do you see an expansion of the industry happening?
What I'm seeing is I think you are seeing a change in terms of trying to supply a marketplace that's looking for cage-free or different differentiators, production methods, and so that's what we're seeing. Maybe where a building might be replaced and with a different production style. So that's more along the lines of what we're seeing.
Your name, you're known in the circles where these barns operate and heavy concentration farms are. But the backyards, the communities that have said, oh, you know what, we're going to reallow, bring back 12, 8, 6 birds, whatever. I think your latest outbreak as we sit here today, there was a backyard outbreak.
Yeah.
How does Mike Naig, the Secretary of Agriculture, have a message for those in urban communities that might be bringing back and allowing chickens or whatever in their backyard?
Hey, I'm for it. I'm okay with seeing. I'm not saying I'm for every. You should be unlimited in terms of how many chickens in town. I'm not. I'm. That's beyond my pay grade. But I am very comfortable with the idea that people can have backyard chickens and small producers, and we do have some small producers who sell at farmers markets or those types of things. There's plenty of room in space for that, in the market for that. Here's what we do talk about, though, is you also, though, are on the front line for high path avian influenza. Just because you have 12 birds or 20 birds or 2,000 birds, you, too, need to be looking for the signs of high path. You, too, need to be thinking about minimizing contact. So this isn't just a big – and I think that's actually something that has borne out this fall in particular. Again, I said we've had fewer – in terms of large commercial operations and a lot of backyard flocks. So that's a reality, and that's okay. It's just that don't assume that just because you've only got a few birds that this isn't an issue that you have to worry about.
So if I grow, let's just say, we'll just take a dozen. So if I put 12 birds in my backyard, what am I hearing from the Department of Ag in Iowa?
Well, take care of those birds and be mindful that you too could be dealing with high path, and if you do, we need to hear from you.
Am I getting literature, phone calls? Do I have permits? I guess I don't even understand it.
No, you're not. I mean, you've got to follow your local ordinances, but no, we don't. As a rule, we're not having premise IDs for somebody that's got a small backyard flock. But that's okay. But what we do is we try to, through media, through social media, through and even reaching out directly to folks around some of these sites that go positive. We're trying to really be focused about how do we get messages to them. But actually, I take it as a good sign that we do have, again, folks that only have a few chickens that are picking up the phone and calling the department and saying things don't look right today, and we'll go out and we'll take samples. It's important. So I think we're getting through, but that's my message would be, it's okay. You can have birds, but just know that don't assume that this isn't a problem that can affect you.
We're going to close with science and food safety. You've mentioned them both. The science of things. You're understanding how this virus transmits. But what are the scientists telling you in this discussion of, we found something, we have hope, we have promise from a science standpoint in this fight?
Well, this is nature, right? Mother Nature. This is a biological thing. These are birds that migrate. Migrating birds, when they get to their destination, mix and match. So some of this is unknown. Let's be honest. I can't sit here and tell you, and I don't think any scientist can, with any certainty, that we aren't going to be dealing with this again in the spring, or that we're done with it this fall or this winter. Meaning that I can't predict what's going to happen there. We have to maintain a state of constant readiness when it comes to that. It's important to track that. It's important to test birds in the wild population so that we can try to determine, we try to anticipate. I think it's interesting that, I think we're all trying to figure out what are the positive ways that artificial intelligence could potentially be deployed, right? And well, I hope that maybe they're not hosting the podcast here, in a couple of years.
You might be. You might not. I might be real or not real.
But I think among the things that you do look at is say, well, how can we deploy new technology or IT insights into trying to be more predictive of where are things moving within the wild bird populations? I don't know. Those are things I'm interested in, and I know others are as well looking at. I'd say the other piece that, and this is not a panacea. This is not a fix for everything, and that would be vaccine. And again, whether we're talking about FMD, ASF, or high path, I think we should be very interested in understanding how vaccines could be developed and then possibly how they could be deployed there are trade implications to using vaccines, right? Because again, you've got to be able to prove that a bird or a product, wasn't affected by that FAD that you're trying to prevent the spread of. And so there's got to be a lot of development there. But I'm pro development and trying to figure out if this could be used as a tool. But there's all kinds of policy implications and trade implications that have to be worked out around that. But I'd rather know that we had a tool and a potential to use it than to say, well, we don't know. And so I think whether it's, again, ASF or High Path, I think we ought to be thinking about those things. So those are maybe the interesting things. That, and we've talked extensively about it, it would be what is the next level on biosecurity? How do you prevent? What's the next thing that you can do to try to be better protective in another round?
Do you get the sense private industry is going to lead that vaccine work, or the government is going to contract out? Where is that meeting of the two?
That's a combination. And that's how that should be, and that's how it is in this whole space. It really is it's a three-leg stool, if that's what you want to say. States, state of Iowa, we've got tremendous assets. Iowa State University, College of Vet Med, the Vet Diagnostic Lab in Ames, such an incredibly important asset and tool for us. That's where all of our testing is done, is up in Ames. And thank goodness that we can get in a car and drive there. And we're not flying samples or overnighting samples. I can't tell you how many times we've got call comes in, we're already on the road. They can get them, those samples run, and we'll have results. Nobody can do it faster than what we can get done here. And so we've got those assets. You've got USDA that has very important assets, also in Ames, but other places. Equipment that we need. But the third leg is industry, and whether that's the pharmaceutical companies or the industries themselves or the grower groups, the checkoff organizations that are investing. It's all of the above. We all need to improve our capacity, but everybody needs to be invested.
And everybody has been invested. I think I heard you on this program before Thanksgiving at one of the last big outbreaks, surge of them. You were, again, talking about, from the consumer standpoint, those who don't have any connection to the bird other than they go to the grocery store and pick it up. These animals are safe to eat, or they're not in the food supply, but the food supply is safe.
That's right. And we like to end every conversation or press release that we do with that point, which is, look, it's always a good idea to properly prepare food, right? And you should do that to temperatures and all those things. Safe handling is always a good idea. But that's the point of having the robust system that we do, is that we head these things off. When we have a detection, those birds are not entering the supply chain. And there's also this idea that you don't want to see animal diseases jump into the human world. And so that's the other reason that we want to be very aggressive and successful in our efforts to manage these diseases, and why it's important that other countries are doing the same thing. I mean, we need to hold others accountable as well for ensuring that they can also say that they have robust systems.
Secretary Mike Naig, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
My thanks to Mike Naig, Secretary of Ag for the state of Iowa. New episodes come out each and every Tuesday. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you can be in the know. Watch or listen to our next episode. Bye-bye.